Welcome to ARC 231 Conceptual Planning. Today is the lecture 3 and the topic will be urban plans and planning processes. We'll try to discuss why planning matters and why urban planning is important to shape the city and to organize the services and facilities to the citizens. So if we look at this picture, it is a complex network and it's a wave of different activities, functions, services, infrastructures, and all these things. But in the center, we will see people and place is the thing most we will discuss. So looking at being a layman, looking at this picture, we want to understand different systems and subsystems within it. But if we go beyond to analyze inside characteristics of it, we will understand how it functions. And that is why urban planning as a subject describes the different functionalities of systems and subsystems. Now look at in Dhaka city situation. Thinking at a scale, we see this is a map of Dhaka metropolitan city and the map of Dhaka city corporation area. The red line is the city corporation boundary and the black line is the boundary of Dhaka metropolitan area, and city is ever growing. In this context, urban plan is a guide to the future of a community of this city. Many different kinds of places, for example, starting from small towns surrounded by farms and countrysides to teeming metropolis that are home to people, use urban planning to help sustain and improve their communities. And Dhaka city is not beyond this description. The growth determinants of this city was always the morphological characteristics, but it was never been determining factor for the city to plan and grow. This is very unfortunate. This study is done by a joint venture in between German corporation and Bangladesh government. They tried to see the morphological character of the city, and if we look at the legend, we can see Madhupur Terrace is the most highland of this greater Dhaka, and then Madhupur Terrace middle, then we have Madhupur Terrace low, and we have different younger natural leaves, older natural leaves, oxbow lakes, and so many other land typologies. So this is based on the topographic data, and topographic data says where should we construct bridges, where should we construct different infrastructures, and even the settlements. So the importance of urban planning is city is ever growing. So we need to strategize to develop the economy as well as to develop the livability conditions. And city is thriving for the quality life. People would like to enjoy life here by accessing different services, different facilities and infrastructures. And for that, we need to have some certain rules and regulations for the proper distribution of land, public spaces, and infrastructure. Then we have some unprecedented event, for example, some disasters. So to cope with these unprecedented events, we need to have a long-term strategies, and later we need to achieve those unwanted events by easing the effect of it. We need to have short-term action plans. So what we can say, urban planning is about analyzing all those spatial and non-spatial characteristics and plan accordingly. Then we can go for the implementation. So the underneath ideology of this importance is we need to keep in focus in three things. One is the people, second is the place, and third is the plan. Then again, positive impact on cities. So urban plan helps our city to grow by providing different economic or opening up different economic opportunities, taking care of more and more job openings, as well as reducing cost of living, optimum utilization of places, making rural-urban linkages. Apart from that, a nation building process is also dependent on good city planning processes. And safe and healthy lifestyle for everyone is also part of this standard we'd like to achieve for our citizens. Then if we look at traditional planning processes, it starts from deriving an objective, which is part of the pre-planning session. Then urban planning process comes. Then we need to have detailed urban planning, which includes architecture as well. Then we need to go for implementation process. Once implementation is done, we can think about the life cycle management, which is basically the maintenance of infrastructure, it's the maintenance of services and all these things. Then we can check back whether some of our infrastructures and service provisions are obsolete or not. Is there any requirement of transformation or not? And this is how we will end up some necessity of interventions to complete the loop again. So once we will get some necessities, we will start finding our objectives once again. A typical seven-step model for planning practices, widely used throughout the world, produced by MIT, Department of Urban Studies and Planning. They suggested, after reviewing a lot of literature, they suggested planning should be started from defining the problem. Once we define problem, then we'll map the stakeholders, those who have some stake in the process. For example, it can be community-based organizations, it can be government departments, it can be NGOs, it can be citizens group, it can be educational institutions, it can be religious institutions, so on and so forth. After that, analyzing institutional resistance and pressure for reform. So we need to have this governance system, and the institutions, they need to have the capacity to realize where to intervene to make all those public services available for the citizens. Then we will engage stakeholders. Once we are engaging stakeholders, we will seek for the consensus whether all the stakeholders and the related parties are agreed upon the plan we are thinking of. Then once the consensus building is done, then we can go for the implementation of policies, programs, and procedures. In this case, these programs can come as a, for example, Dhaka Detailed Area Plan is a plan, but it has been developed over the years, and people has to agree on whether this will go in the field or not. So this is about policy, program, and procedures. After all these government policy, procedures, and programs implemented, we can reflect and encourage public learning and make adjustment. So there is always a chance to go back to the previous one, even the one we are thinking about something is wrong with this segment. For example, if we think that stakeholder engagement is not properly handled, then we can even go back to the stakeholder mapping, because maybe some stakeholders are left behind in the process. So planning for changing places. Urban planning looks at what good and bad about a community in the present and plans ahead for how the community can maintain and improve itself in the future. So it's about what is we have in the present time and what we want to have in the future time. So there is a need for a vision or an objective for the city. Considering all these things, we can see these 5 elements as a starting point. For example, we need to see the population changes, population projections, and the trend of population growth and everything. Then we can think about changing places, how geography is actually helping people to be there or move from a certain place to another places. So that is an important paradigm we need to look at. Then we need to look at economic trends, whether this city is economically viable or not, whether the city is making too many opportunities for the incomers or not. New technologies are welcomed in the cities or not, or new technologies are introduced or even sometimes practiced in the management system of the city or not. That is important. And eventually what is important is the environmental concerns. The city is basically a place where environmental morphology or geographic context is somewhat very important. If we need to have need to control if we need to control environmentally sensitive areas, then definitely it will backfire in our case, in the city making cases. So we need to preserve those ecologically sensitive areas. We need to preserve proportionately all the open space, agricultural land, and lakes, and all other vegetations, and so on and so forth. Looking at the way things work, that means we're talking about components of plants. Cities are made up of related components. It cannot be limited to this land use, housing, natural resources, public services, and transportation. Rather, it may go beyond. But the point is, an urban plan is sort of a blueprint for the long-term development of a community. So a plan says what the community could and should be like at some point in the future. Usually, this case is made for 20 years. So talking about these components, land use is considered one of the most important component, because under this land use, we see the classification of different lands. For example, commercial and industrial, residential, central business district, open spaces, ecologically sensitive areas. So we define the use of particular lands through this land use planning first. Then we can think about the housing, assessing housing conditions, and the range of housing characteristics are important here. It includes a mix of different types of housing in the community, starting from a single family home to apartment buildings or even social housing. Ages and physical conditions of housing and issues related to housing affordability and ownership is also equally important to look at, to understand which housing areas are obsolete, which housing areas are thriving or cannot cope up with the current trend or demand of the population or not. So this is what important to under this component of housing. Then we can talk about transportation. Transportation, every now and then we depend on our transport network and transport system. So people need to be connected from their home to their workplace, to their schools, to their healthcare facilities, and so on. We need to give some answers to the question of can people get from here to there? Are they quite mobile? Are they feeling hindrance? Are they quite accessible? Are they mobile? Can they get where they need to go? So if these questions are solved, then we can think about how they can do it. Is it pedestrian oriented development is important for neighborhood, or is it transit oriented development is important for the neighborhood? So these are the questions we would address under this component transportation. Urban design as a component is important to know that it's not always about aesthetic, but also functionality of those designs are important. Cities are made up of many blocks, many individual buildings, public buildings, private buildings, streets, parks, neighborhoods, and so on. But all those elements of urban design should be in a way harmonized that the beauty and usefulness coexist to each other. Environmental issue as a component is looking at preserving a city's natural elements, providing open spaces, recreational areas, preserving agriculture and ecologically sensitive areas. So environment should be considered and always considered in a plan in a high priority or high preference, in a high preference. So in the end, infrastructure and services, which has twofold phases. One is what we see, and one phase we do not see usually. We see roadways, power lines, which is visible, and sometimes we don't see the power line, we don't see the sewage line, we don't see water pipeline, which is underground. So these are the components, usual components we consider in the city plan process, and there are many more. Sometimes it depends on the geographic area, it depends on the city. So this is it for the lecture 3. Thank you so much.